I never thought a family picnic would turn into something I'd replay in nightmares for years. My hands were trembling as I held my grandson's freezing little body against mine, his skin pale, lips blue, as if life itself had abandoned him. Less than 5 minutes earlier, I had watched him toddle, slow and careful as always, toward the edge of the frozen lake. And then he came, my daughter-in-law's brother. 19, arrogant, cruel. He pushed him, not hard, not violently. Just a little nudge, a mocking laugh. "Why are you always so slow?" he scoffed, like my grandson was some defective toy instead of a living, breathing child with a stutter and a gentle heart. The ice cracked. I heard it before I saw it. A sharp, unnatural sound that split the air. My boy went under. And then something took over, some part of me I didn't know existed. I ran. I didn't scream, didn't think. I dove in. The cold swallowed me whole, but I found him. Thank God, I found him. I dragged his tiny body to shore, choking on my own sobs as I pressed his chest and begged him to breathe. When the ambulance pulled in, they were still laughing. His mother, her brother, standing there as if this was all just some harmless joke that got a little out of hand. "He'll be fine," she said with a roll of her eyes, like she couldn't be bothered. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She didn't even kneel. But I did. Wrapped in soaked clothes, hair sticking to my face, hands shaking, I looked up at her and said nothing. There was nothing left to say. I turned away, took out my phone, dialed the only person who's never once made me feel like a burden. My brother. When he answered, I didn't cry. I didn't explain. I simply whispered, "Do what you have to do." He didn't ask for details. He just said, "All right?" They didn't know it yet, but that moment, right there by the frozen lake, would be the last time they'd laugh at my grandson. And the last time they'd ever underestimate me. Wrapped in a stiff hospital-issued blanket, I sat under flickering fluorescent lights, my heart thudding louder than the ticking clock. The nurses rushed in and out, but no one met my eyes. A social worker asked gently, "Was it an accident?" I didn't flinch. "He was pushed," I said flatly. The woman blinked. "Just kids playing?" I could still hear them laughing, the brother-in-law and his friend, as if they hadn't nearly killed him. Across the room, my daughter-in-law sipped from a vending machine coffee cup, scrolling her phone. "Boys will be boys," she muttered when I looked her way. "You're being dramatic." I didn't argue. Instead, I pulled out my phone and texted my brother one more word, "Now." He replied with a checkmark. The morning after the lake, I found myself sitting on the edge of my grandson's small bed, the quilt we'd sewn together in autumn still tucked neatly at the corners. His scent, faint vanilla and school glue, still clung to the pillow. I pressed my hand there gently, like it might hold him in place. The room was quiet, too quiet. He loved the mornings. Even with his stutter, even with the way the world seemed to trip him up, he always greeted me with a whispered, "Hi, Nana," and wrapped his arms around my waist. Always. I remembered the time he brought home a broken pine cone from the schoolyard, cradled like treasure. "It's still good," he told me. "It just needs someone to keep it safe." That's how I saw him. Precious. Fragile, yes. But not weak. My daughter-in-law never saw it that way. She hated that he needed extra help at school. Hated the therapy sessions, the IEP meetings, the little visual cue cards. She said they held her son back. Her son. As if my grandson didn't belong to all of us. As if he was a project she could give up on if the results didn't come fast enough. Once, after a long and difficult morning trying to help him pronounce a word, triangle, I think, she slammed her coffee mug down and muttered, "God, he's exhausting. He's not like other kids. Something's off." I thought she was just stressed. That she'd come around. But now I see it clearly. She wasn't overwhelmed. She was erasing him, little by little. From family photos, from plans, from conversations. Like he was just a detour on the road to her perfect life. And I had let her. I pulled the quilt into my lap and ran my fingers over the stitches, tiny, uneven ones made by his small hands. We'd used bits of old shirts, pajama pants, even a scrap from my own wedding dress. I remembered how proud he was when we finished. "This is ours," he said. Now I held that quilt like a flag. A reminder. A promise. She didn't get to decide his worth. Not while I was still breathing. 3 days after the lake, I drove out to my brother's place, an old wood cabin tucked between pine trees and silence. He met me at the door, no hug, no small talk. just handed me a cup of coffee and said, "Sit." I've started digging. I nodded, my hands wrapped around the mug for warmth, even though the room was already warm. He'd been a state investigator before he retired. Quiet, methodical, lethal when it counted. "You were right to call me," he said. He laid out the folder in front of me. "Thin, but growing. There were 2 incidents logged at your grandson's school," he said. One teacher wrote him up for emotional disruption. Another noted concerns about bullying. "Did anyone report it officially?" I asked. He shook his head. "They were flagged but never followed through. Someone made sure they stayed buried." When I ran the administrators' names, I found a link: your daughter-in-law's parents. Major donors, major influence. Of course. That's how she kept getting away with it. The cold remarks, the "boys will be boys," the passive neglect, it all slid under the radar because she came wrapped in money and charm. "They've built a wall around her," my brother continued. "But walls have cracks. And I plan to find every single one." I looked at the photo he'd printed of the assistant principal. "He's the one who filed the suppression," he explained. "And he's up for a promotion next month." My stomach turned. So he buried it to protect himself. He nodded grimly. "These people don't care about the kid. They care about their reputations." Outside, the wind whistled through the trees, but I barely heard it. I thought maybe I was imagining things, I admitted. That maybe I was just too old-fashioned, too protective. But she's been targeting him. Not just ignoring him, targeting. My brother slid another sheet toward me, a copy of a private message thread between school staff. One line stood out like a knife: "If the grandma won't stop interfering, we may need to escalate." My hand tightened around the coffee mug. So it wasn't just about him anymore. They saw me as the problem. "They picked the wrong old woman," I whispered. My brother looked at me then, just for a second. "We'll do this clean. No mess. Legal. But we'll hit where it hurts." I took a slow breath. "And where is that?" He smiled without humor. "Money. Reputation. Custody." For the first time since that freezing day by the lake, I felt the faintest flicker of something deep in my chest. Hope. Not the soft kind. The sharp kind. The kind you sharpen like a blade. The church potluck smelled of casseroles and lemon bars, the kind of comfort food meant to make you forget things, like fractured families and cold hospital rooms. I stood near the coffee urn, smiling politely, answering the usual small-town questions. "How's your garden? Still watching your grandson?" No one asked about the lake. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe they didn't want to. But just as I was about to leave, a woman touched my elbow. She was small, mousy, with anxious eyes. One of the kindergarten teachers. I remembered her. She'd always been kind to my grandson, slipping him extra time on spelling tests and offering tissues when his words got tangled. "I've always loved your grandson," she said softly, her voice nearly drowned by the laughter around us. But there were things we weren't allowed to report. My heart stopped. "What kind of things?" She glanced around, then whispered, "Can I email you? It's safer." I nodded. She looked relieved. "Tonight," she promised. "Check your spam folder, too. I'm not using my school account." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, the only light coming from the old lamp by the fridge. I kept refreshing my inbox. At 11:46 p.m., it came. The subject line read, "What you suspected was true." Inside was a list of incidents: ignored bruises, skipped evaluations, pressure to classify my grandson as a behavioral problem, rather than a child in need of support. They didn't want the paperwork, she wrote. Didn't want to accommodate him. So they labeled him difficult. His mother approved the change. I set the laptop down and pressed my palm to my chest. It wasn't just negligence. It was intent. My daughter-in-law wanted him to seem broken, easier to dismiss. Easier to give up on. I stood, pacing the kitchen in slow circles. My body ached, but not from age. From knowing too much and doing too little. No more. I went into his room, where he was finally sleeping soundly again, curled under the quilt we'd made. His breathing was soft, even. For now, he was safe. But I understood something in that moment. This wasn't just about the lake. Or the school. They were preparing a narrative. Slowly, quietly. And I was the last person standing in their way. The room smelled faintly of lavender and books, two things I used to love before my life became all sharp edges. I sat across from Dr. Laurel, a therapist I hadn't seen in years. She'd helped me after my husband passed. Now I was back, older, but somehow more broken. I think I'm losing my mind, I told her. I see patterns everywhere, like they're out to erase him. And maybe me, too. She didn't rush to reassure me. She never did. She just nodded, hands folded in her lap. Tell me what happened. So I did. The lake. The laughter. The file my brother found. The email from the teacher. I told her how my daughter-in-law barely looked at him anymore, how she flinched when he stuttered, how she bragged about her family's influence like it was a shield. When I finished, the silence hung heavy. You're not imagining it, Dr. Laurel said. What you're describing is systemic emotional cruelty. And you're not paranoid. You're perceptive. That word, perceptive, landed like bomb. For days I'd been second-guessing myself. What if I was too emotional? What if I was just one of those grandmothers who couldn't let go? But she continued, calm and clear. They've been isolating him, making him feel less than for who he is. And they've been doing the same to you. Because you notice. Because you're not easy to shut up. My throat tightened. Then why does everyone else act like it's normal? Because it's convenient, she said. Because calling it out means taking responsibility. And people like your daughter-in-law, people with money and control, they know how to make silence feel like safety. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. What do I do now? You keep records. You gather support. And most importantly, don't let them make you doubt what you know. You are not overreacting. You are the line between that child and the world that's trying to reshape him. I left her office with a list, legal names, advocacy groups, state education contacts. And something else I hadn't felt in a while, conviction. They were playing a long game. But I'd been underestimated my whole life. And I'd survived worse than this. This time, I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for him. It was a Monday like any other, at least on the surface. The coffee brewed, the floor creaked under my slippers, and outside, the neighborhood dog barked like he always did. But I moved through that kitchen like someone preparing for war. While the house was still quiet, I opened the old biscuit tin where I kept important documents. One by one, I started laying things out. My grandson's birth certificate, medical records, old school reports, photos, proof that I had been there since day one. That I wasn't just the sweet old lady who brought snacks and knitted blankets. I was his history, his witness. I printed copies and labeled them carefully. I called my lawyer. I didn't ask. I informed. I'll be coming in for updates to my will, I said. And I'll need copies of my guardianship papers. Every version. Across the table sat my grandson's lunchbox, the one with the faded dinosaur stickers. I cleaned it out gently, like I was preparing an offering. Every detail mattered now. My daughter-in-law came down the stairs just as I was sealing an envelope. You're up early, she said, half suspicious, half bored. She had that tone again, the one she used when she thought I was being dramatic. I smiled without teeth. Just organizing old papers. She narrowed her eyes. You're stirring things up again, aren't you? I kept my hands steady as I zipped the folder closed. No, dear. Just tidying. You know how clutter makes me anxious. She scoffed and poured herself a smoothie, the kind with chia seeds and powdered algae. You act like you're the only one who cares about him. That made me pause. But I didn't turn around. I am the only one who listens to him. Silence stretched between us like a wire pulled tight. Then she changed the subject. She always did when she felt the ground shift. I sent the documents to my brother that afternoon. He was already one step ahead, gathering school complaints, tracing phone calls, building a case brick by brick. No gossip, no threats, just facts. Stay quiet, he warned. Let them think you're folding. So I did. I smiled through dinner. I complimented her on the kale salad she didn't make. I nodded when she mentioned some charity gala her parents were hosting. But behind my calm was a growing storm. They thought I was old. They thought I was harmless. What they didn't know was this. I wasn't building a defense. I was building an escape. For me. For him. From all of them. A week later, I was called into the school. The tone of the email had been vague, a concern we'd like to discuss. No names, no details. But my gut knew. I wore my nicest coat, not because I wanted to impress them, but because I refused to walk into battle looking like prey. The principal's office was sterile and uncomfortable, full of framed awards and false warmth. The secretary offered me tea. I declined. When the principal finally appeared, she was all smiles. We just want what's best for the children, she chirped, folding her hands like a saint. But then she slid a folder toward me, thin but poisonous. My name was on the top. Inside, a complaint had been filed. Against me. You're creating an unsafe emotional environment, it read. Unsafe. Me. The same woman who had pulled that boy from under the ice. The one who packed his lunch, stayed up nights reviewing speech exercises, sat through every parent-teacher meeting when his own mother couldn't make it. And now I was the danger? I felt my knees weaken slightly, but I didn't let it show. I kept my voice calm. And who exactly filed this? The principal glanced away. It was brought to our attention by family. We're required to log and review any concerns, especially when guardianship roles are unclear. Guardianship roles. That's what this was about. She's flipping the story, I whispered. What was that? The principal asked. I smiled. Nothing. Just thinking aloud. I signed the paperwork, knowing it meant little. My brother had already warned me this might happen. When they realize they can't control you directly, he'd said, they'll try to discredit you. And they had. Quickly. Cleanly. With language that sounded neutral but was loaded like a gun. I walked out of that office with my chin held high. But inside, something colder than lake water was creeping in. Not fear, resolve. They were creating a narrative, meddling grandmother, unstable, overstepping her role. It was tidy, easy to believe, but I had one thing they didn't expect. Receipts, photos, witnesses, and a paper trail long enough to circle back and strangle them with. When I got home, my daughter-in-law was humming in the kitchen, like it was just another Tuesday. I didn't say a word, but I looked at her and thought, you've just made your first real mistake. The day after the school meeting, I pulled out my gardening gloves. Not because the weeds needed tending, though they did, but because I needed to put my hands on something real. Something alive. Something that grew because I nurtured it, not in spite of me. I spent hours in that garden. Kneeling in the dirt, pruning, trimming, repotting. The same hands they accused of emotional harm were now cradling tiny roots and coaxing life from dry soil. Midway through trimming the hydrangeas, I made a decision. If they were going to come for me, I needed backup. Not just my brother. Not just memories. Experts. That night, I reached out to a disability advocate I'd met once at a seminar years ago. We'd exchanged cards and never followed up, until now. When she answered, I introduced myself again and gave her the barest outline. Neurodivergent child, emotional neglect, suppression at school. Her voice changed. I see this more than you'd believe, she said. They blame the child for needing what the system won't give. I told her what the school had done. What the mother had said. About the pushed diagnosis, the rewrites, the complaint against me. After a pause, she said, they're targeting him for being neurodivergent. And you, for being the only one who cares. Something in my chest unclenched. Would you be willing to meet with the school? I asked. I'll do better than that, she said. I'll request a formal IEP review. And I'll attend it with you. With or without his mother. The next morning, I sent the request in writing, certified mail. I copied the principal, the district office, the school board, and then I attached the advocate's credentials, just for good measure. They wouldn't steamroll us again. That afternoon, I went back to the garden. My grandson joined me this time, dragging a plastic trowel and wearing a sun hat too big for his head. He didn't say much, just hummed a little as he helped sprinkle soil around the tulips. I like it here, he said quietly. It's not loud. I smiled. Me too. In that moment, I realized, the noise wasn't out there, it was in me. All the doubt, the fear, the second guessing. But when I focused on him, it all went still. They wanted to twist the story. But we were already planting something stronger. And this time, we weren't planting alone. The day of the IEP meeting, I wore navy blue, my quiet armor. My advocate arrived early. She was sharp, poised, and unbothered by the assistant principal's forced smile or the school psychologist's distracted glances. Then my daughter-in-law walked in, late, holding an iced coffee and acting like this was an inconvenience. Sorry, she said, not sorry at all. Traffic. The meeting began. The principal tried to gloss over things. We're here to support a positive learning environment, she said, flipping through papers that had been scrubbed clean of any real accountability. But my advocate interrupted before they could sweep us along. We'll be requesting independent evaluations, she said calmly but firmly. Speech, cognitive, emotional. Not done by school staff. Neutral third parties. My daughter-in-law laughed, like we'd just suggested something outrageous. This isn't necessary, she said, setting her cup down with a clatter. He's just difficult. He needs structure, not more attention. I turned to face her, slowly. He's not difficult. He's different, and he's ours. Her jaw tightened. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't even raise my voice. But that sentence, those 7 words, hit the room like a bell. She tried to interrupt. The advocate raised a hand. This child has the right to an accurate evaluation and appropriate support. That is not optional. The school psychologist cleared his throat, suddenly very interested in his clipboard. Well, if the family is in agreement. I'm not, my daughter-in-law snapped. Good, said the advocate. Then we'll note that. And if necessary, we'll escalate. There it was again, that flicker in her eyes. Not fear, not yet, but discomfort, disbelief that someone had dared to push back. She didn't understand that I had stopped being afraid the moment I pulled that boy from the water. And once a woman stops fearing fire, she learns to walk through it. When the meeting ended, the advocate turned to me in the hallway and whispered, "That went better than I expected." I nodded. They're not used to being challenged. And she's not used to being seen. I glanced down the hallway, where my daughter-in-law walked ahead, texting furiously. She's starting to realize something, I said. What's that? The advocate asked. That I'm not going anywhere. That night, after everyone was asleep, I pulled the photo album from the top of the hallway closet. The one with the cracked leather spine and missing corners. I hadn't opened it in years. I carried it to the dining room table, the same table where we'd once celebrated birthdays and spilled juice and carved pumpkins. It felt like another lifetime. I flipped through the pages slowly, the plastic covers crackling as I turned them. My fingers stopped on a picture near the back. My husband, gone nearly 10 years now, was sitting in the old rocking chair, holding our grandson as a newborn. His hands were so big around that tiny body. His smile. God, I'd forgotten how safe it made me feel. We'd only had a few years with him before the cancer came. But I remembered what he said the day this photo was taken. I remembered it exactly. Protect this boy like he's our second chance. I pressed my hand to the image, as if I could reach back in time. If he were here now, I knew he'd be right beside me. No doubt, no fear. I'd been tentative up until now, careful, cautious. I kept asking if I was overreacting. I kept worrying about what people would think, how I'd look, but none of that mattered anymore. Not after what I'd seen. Not after what I'd heard. My daughter-in-law had laughed when he went under the ice. Her brother had called him broken. The school had tried to make him invisible. And I had played along, quietly, politely, because that's what I was taught. Not anymore. I stood and walked to the hallway mirror. Looked myself in the eye. I didn't see an old woman. I saw a storm in human form. I went back to the kitchen and opened a drawer where I kept all the, just in case, documents, old insurance papers, I hadn't looked at in years. I pulled everything out, laid it flat. I had nothing left to lose, but everything to protect. And in that moment, I made a silent promise to the photo on the table, to the boy sleeping down the hall, and to the version of myself who'd once thought staying quiet was the noble thing to do. I'm awake now, and God help the ones who thought I'd stay asleep. 2 days later, I sat across from my lawyer with a pen in my hand and steel in my spine. I want to make some changes, I told him. Quiet ones. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask why. He'd known me long enough to recognize the tone in my voice, the one I used when my mind was already made up. Guardianship first, I said. If something happens to me, anything, he doesn't go to his mother. He goes to my brother. It needs to be airtight. He nodded. And the trust? Yes, I said, placing a flash drive on the desk. That's everything I've set aside. Retirement, inheritance, property. It all goes into a fund. For my grandson. No one else touches it. He tapped his pen thoughtfully. Do you want it triggered upon death or incapacitation? I looked him straight in the eye. Trigger it the moment they try anything shady. And I do mean anything. I want legal clauses so sharp they bleed. He chuckled softly, but then saw I wasn't smiling. These people, I said, voice quiet, they think they're clever. That I'm just some sentimental grandmother with bad knees and a soft heart. I leaned forward. I'm done being underestimated. We worked for hours, fine-tuning language, setting up alerts, layering protections so complex it would take a team of lawyers to unwind them. And when we were finished, he slid the new documents across the table and said, "You're ready." As I signed the last page, I felt a strange kind of peace. Not joy, not yet, but readiness. I was building a structure they couldn't see. A fortress behind every smile. A locked gate behind every, "bless your heart." And they wouldn't know it existed until it slammed shut behind them. Later that night, I tucked my grandson into bed. He looked so small beneath the quilt, a book still open on his chest. "Why do you always check the locks before bed?" he asked sleepily. I kissed his forehead. Because sometimes love means preparing for storms no one else sees coming. And I had seen this one. Long before the ice broke. The call came on a gray Thursday morning. Just as I was slicing apples for my grandson's lunchbox. "This is Officer Jensen from the local precinct. We've received a report of potential neglect. We'll need you to come down to answer a few questions." I stood still, paring knife in hand. They'd done it. I told him I'd be there within the hour. My hands were steady. My heart? Not so much. When I arrived at the station, I recognized the officer. Young, polite, but wary. He gestured toward a small interview room, neutral walls, bland chairs, the smell of stale coffee and fluorescent lighting. "They said you've been interfering with medical decisions," he began. "That the child's been showing signs of emotional distress due to your presence." I smiled, just barely. "Did they happen to mention the icy lake?" I asked. "Or the school complaints that went missing? Or the family friend who pushed him?" He paused. "They said there's no record of that." I reached into my bag and placed a flash drive on the table. "Well," I said, "there is now." I watched him insert the drive. Inside, time-stamped emails, medical reports, school correspondence, and a freshly signed affidavit from the teacher who'd finally had enough. But that wasn't even the twist. Just as the officer was leaning in to read, his desk phone rang. He stepped out to answer it. 5 minutes later, he came back with a different look in his eyes. "That teacher you mentioned," he said. "She just sent her formal statement to the DA's office. Looks like your brother's timing was spot on." I couldn't help it. I let out a small laugh. Not because it was funny. Because it was finally working. He closed the file and stood. "This interview is concluded. We appreciate your cooperation." When I walked out, the air felt lighter. My phone buzzed. A text from my brother, "You're not the only one playing chess." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. She had tried to bury me under accusations. But I came back with truth. And timing. The game had shifted. And for the first time, they were the ones scrambling. She didn't even knock. My daughter-in-law stormed into my house like she still owned the room, her boots wet from the rain, fury radiating off her like static. She didn't wait for me to speak. "You've always hated me," she hissed. "From the beginning. Don't pretend this is about the child. You're obsessed. You've poisoned him against me." I stood by the fireplace, calm but ready. "I didn't have to poison him," I said. "He lived with you." Her eyes narrowed. "You're making him soft. He's weak because of you. All this attention, these evaluations, your little crusade." I stepped forward. Not loud, not shaking. "You threw a child under ice and laughed." That stopped her cold. For a split second, I saw something flash in her expression. Panic? Guilt? No. Something colder. She dropped her purse on the table and crossed her arms. "You can't prove any of that." "I don't need to," I replied. "Because you already did. Every email, every excuse, every complaint you filed, it all paints the same picture." She tilted her head like a predator circling prey. "He's not going to survive this world," she said, voice flat. "And all your mollycoddling won't change that. He's a broken little boy. And he's dragging us all down." My chest burned, but I didn't look away. "You mean he's dragging down your version of success? Your curated family? The one that looks good in photos but falls apart in the dark?" She smirked. "You think a judge will side with a senile grandmother over a professional mother with a clean record?" I almost pitied her in that moment. She still didn't understand. "I'm not standing alone," I said. "And this isn't about me. This is about a child who's been ignored, mistreated, and nearly killed under your care." Silence. Then she picked up her purse and walked toward the door. "You're going to regret this," she said without turning. "No," I replied. "I regret waiting this long." She slammed the door behind her. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready. The courtroom smelled like old wood and cold air. Every sound echoed, a cough, a shuffle, the quiet clack of lawyers arranging their papers. I sat at the petitioner's table, my hands folded, documents neatly stacked. My advocate beside me, my brother behind me. She arrived late, of course. Perfectly pressed, perfectly cold. Her lawyers flanked her, armed with binders and smugness. The judge called it, temporary guardianship hearing. She leaned into performance like it was second nature. "I'm just trying to raise my son," she said, voice soft, eyes misty. But my mother-in-law refuses to respect boundaries. She's inserting herself, confusing him, making things harder. Her lawyer added, "She's emotionally unstable, Your Honor. She's already been reported to the School and Child Protective Services." I didn't interrupt. I didn't flinch. When it was my turn, I stood slowly. My voice didn't boom, but it didn't break either. "I'm not here to win an argument," I said. "I'm here to protect a child." I passed forward photos of bruises, ignored medical notes, suppressed school reports. I played the voicemail from the teacher who'd finally spoken up. I read the letter from the therapist confirming the emotional damage, the missed diagnoses, the manipulation. Her lawyer objected. The judge overruled. Then came the affidavit from the child advocate. The email chains. The formal request for an independent evaluation blocked by her signature. Her smile faltered. "I finished with this. This isn't about revenge. This is about a little boy who loves bugs and puzzles and asks me if the moon ever gets lonely. A boy who was called difficult when he simply needed help. A boy who nearly died in front of people who laughed." I sat down. My legs trembled, but my hands didn't. The courtroom was silent. The judge asked only one question: "Is the child present?" I turned. My brother stood, guiding him in gently. He looked small in that room. But he walked straight to me, climbed into my lap, rested his head on my shoulder like he'd always belonged there. "I feel safe with Nana," he whispered. And that was it. When the judge ruled in my favor, I felt my knees nearly give out. Temporary guardianship granted. Visitation restricted. Evaluation ordered. She stood there frozen. No more fake tears. No more rehearsed indignation. Just silence. Because this time, she lost. Not to a bitter old woman. To the truth. The hearing had taken everything out of me, but I didn't go home. I went straight to the hospital. He'd been back for observation, just routine checks after a small fever turned into something more. Stress wears on little bodies, and he'd carried too much for too long. When I walked into the room, he looked so small again. Wires taped to his fingers. A beeping monitor beside his bed. But he was awake. He turned his head and saw me. And just like that, his eyes lit up. "You came back," he whispered. "I always do," I said, sitting beside him. His hand reached for mine. Tiny, warm, alive. I hadn't cried in court. I hadn't cried in the police station. I hadn't cried while signing over my finances to protect him. But now, sitting in that sterile hospital room, with his fingers wrapped around mine like I was the only safe place left, I let myself feel it. Relief. Not victory. Not yet. But something gentler. Like oxygen returning after being held underwater too long. He looked up at the ceiling. "Do I still have to go back there? With her?" I shook my head. "Not for a while. The judge says you'll be staying with me." His body relaxed. Visibly. Like someone had lifted a stone off his chest. I brushed the hair from his forehead. "You're going to get help now. Real help. With people who see you." He nodded, eyes fluttering closed. When the nurse came in to check his vitals, she smiled at me. "He's been asking for you nonstop," she whispered. I nodded, swallowing hard. "He'll always have me." Later that afternoon, my daughter-in-law came by. Her access had been restricted, one short, supervised visit per week. She didn't look at me when she walked in. Didn't greet him. Just stood at the foot of the bed with that frozen smile she wore for strangers. "He looks fine," she said flatly. Did he even miss me? He didn't answer. Just pulled the blanket tighter and turned his face toward me. The social worker politely asked her to leave. My brother, waiting in the hallway, just nodded as she passed. She didn't look back. We didn't cheer. We didn't gloat. We simply existed. Still standing. For now, that was enough. A month later, the garden was quiet again. The leaves had begun to turn amber, rust, gold. My grandson and I knelt side by side, planting tulip bulbs deep into the cool earth. His hands were steadier now. Stronger. "These will bloom when it's warmer, right?" he asked, patting down the soil. "Yes," I said. "They'll sleep through winter first. But when spring comes, they'll remember." He looked up at me, face serious. "Will we still be here then?" I didn't rush the answer. I looked out over the backyard, at the laundry fluttering on the line, the hammock swinging gently from last night's breeze, the scarecrow we'd built together with a floppy old hat. "Yes, baby," I said finally. "This is our home now." The court made it official last week, long-term guardianship granted. His name was now tied to mine on every line that mattered. And hers? Hers had been restricted further. Mandatory supervision. Parenting classes. She didn't fight it. Not anymore. She was quiet now. Her parents had pulled back too, after the school board opened a formal inquiry into the missing records. My brother made sure their donations wouldn't bury that story this time. There'd be no gala this fall. No pristine image to parade. Just silence. And consequences. My grandson tugged at my sleeve. "Can we get a cat?" I smiled. "Let's get through the winter first. Then we'll talk about kittens." He nodded, satisfied. After he ran inside to wash up, I stayed a little longer in the garden. The wind picked up, scattering dried leaves around my boots. I remembered the lake, the hospital, the courtroom, but they didn't own me anymore. What I carried now was something different. Not rage, not revenge. Dignity. Dignity in the choices I made when no one else would. In the way I held firm when I could have folded. In the quiet strength of knowing I'd done right by the boy who trusted me with his whole heart. From the porch, I heard him call for hot cocoa. "Coming," I yelled back, wiping my hands on my jeans. As I stood and looked over the bulbs we'd planted, hidden beneath the surface, waiting, I realized, the frost had passed. The ice had broken, and spring was already on its way.